A lot of boxers are undefeated now. You see 15-0, 20-0, even 30-0 all the time. That used to be less common, and it's not just because everyone suddenly got better. Over the past 50 years, boxing changed in a few ways that make the zero easier to keep. More belts showed up. The money got bigger. Big promoters became more powerful. Pay-per-view turned undefeated into something you can market, not just a record. You can see this in someone like Alexander Usyk, an elite champion who didn't need a constant stream of fights to climb the ladder. That's not by accident. Boxing also works differently from other sports. There's no draft like the NBA. There's no single league that forces top prospects to fight each other. And unlike MMA, you're not locked into one ranking system where the next matchup is obvious. So the big questions are simple. Why does it seem like so many boxers are undefeated? And is it actually easier now than before? The numbers. You can see how common undefeated records are right now by looking at the Ring's rankings. In the heavyweight update, Alexander Usyk is listed as champion at 24-0, and the same top 10 table includes unbeaten contenders like Agit Kabayel at 26-0, with Moses Itama at 13-0. That's multiple zero losses records near the top of the same division at the same time. The part that changed over time is how often elite fighters get exposed to risk. Older, great fighters usually fought way more, which gave them more chances to take a loss. Sugar Ray Robinson finished with 201 pro fights and a record listed as 174 wins and 19 losses. His record also shows how busy he was in his peak years, including 16 fights in 1949 and 19 fights in 1950. If you are fighting every few weeks, a perfect record becomes harder to keep, even if you are the best. One bad night or one tough matchup has more chances to happen. MMA is a good contrast because it is rare for UFC champions to be undefeated, and most top fighters run into other top fighters sooner. The next piece is how the zero gets built in the first place. It starts with matchmaking. An undefeated record usually starts getting shaped before a boxer is even 1-0. Their team picks a path. That team is usually a trainer, a manager, and a promoter. They are not asking, who is the toughest person we can fight next? They are asking, who helps us move up without risking a big loss? Early fights are about getting rounds and getting comfortable. The first opponents are usually picked for reliability. They show up, they make weight. That's how a prospect can go 6-0 and not fight anyone close to their level. Then the team starts picking the first real steps. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is an example of timing the first title shot. His first world title fight came when he was 17-0. He fought Renato Hernandez for the WBC super featherweight title on October 3, 1998 at the Las Vegas Hilton. That fight was Mayweather's first world title fight, and it happened after a runway of wins. Another example is Saul Canelo Alvarez, who fought for a world title when he was 35-0-1. He fought Matthew Hatton for the vacant WBC Super Welterweight title on March 5, 2011, at the Honda Center in Anaheim, California. A heavyweight example is Anthony Joshua. He fought for the IBF heavyweight title when he was 15-0. He fought Charles Martin on April 9, 2016, at the O2 Arena in London. It was a big jump, but it still came after the team felt the timing was right, not right away. When someone jumps into the deep end too early, people remember it because it's rare. Leon Spinks fought Muhammad Ali for the heavyweight title when Spinks was 6-0-1. Leaps like that are not the normal path, and it shows why most teams avoid that level of risk early. Once a fighter starts getting attention, the matchmaking can actually get safer in some ways. The zero has value now, so teams start choosing opponents that look good but are less likely to beat them. They also pick fights that fit the boxer's style because a clean win is safer than a messy one. The next piece is why this is even possible and what makes boxing a special case. Turning pro. In boxing, turning pro is not like the NBA. There is no draft. There is no one league that signs all the best young fighters. If you can get licensed and get matched, you can fight for money. That setup is a big reason it's easier to build an undefeated record. It also means a boxer can grow their record without getting forced into the hardest matchups right away. In MMA, the rankings and the matchmaker push you toward other top guys. In boxing, a team can keep the level controlled. The clearest way to see how loose the pipeline is to look at who can end up in a world title fight on short notice. Josh Padley was working as an electrician, then got a late call to fight Shakur Stevenson for a world title. He took the fight with very little time to prepare. That kind of jump tells you something simple. Boxing can create title fights where one side is fully built for that moment and the other side is stepping in because the spot needs to be filled. That does not mean every opponent is a bum. It means weird matchups can happen. A fighter who is not full-time can end up on the biggest stage. And if that is possible at the title level, it is even more possible earlier in a career, when nobody is watching closely yet. That's where a lot of undefeated records are built. They're built in fights where the team believes the odds are heavily in their favor. The next piece is hand-picking opponents. Padding the record. Padding a record means taking fights that are very likely wins again and again while the record grows. A team can look at the options and choose someone who is there to survive, take a check, and move on. That is how a boxer can be 12-0 without beating a top contender yet. You see it in a very clear way with Kermel Moten. He turned pro at 17 and was placed on big cards right away, but his opponents were chosen carefully while his record grew. By 2025, he was 8-0 with 6 knockouts, and most of those fights came against boxers who were there to give rounds. The point is not that Moten isn't talented. The point is how the early record is built. Big stage, controlled steps, low surprise, and a fast-growing 0 before any real danger shows up. Julio Cesar Chavez was 89-0-1 before he took his first official loss. That does not mean he fought 90 easy fights. A run like that is almost impossible in sports, where the schedule forces you into equal matchups sooner. A good padding look is when a fighter has a big record but few risky nights. Sven Otka is one example people bring up for this idea. He retired 34-0, and a lot of his career happened under one tight setup, mostly in Germany, with fights chosen to keep him winning and keep title defenses steady. That is what padding looks like at a higher level. Steady wins, low surprise, and no forced leap into the worst matchup. Next, let's get into why boxing allows this more than other sports. No single league. In most sports, you can't hide for long. The league sets the schedule, and the best teams compete. Boxing doesn't work like that. As mentioned before, there is no one league that owns the whole sport and forces the top fighters to fight each other on one timeline. Rankings are split across groups, so even if 2 guys are clearly near the top, the fight still might not happen. That setup makes it easier to stay undefeated because the best fight is not always the next fight. A team can say no, they can wait, they can move up or down a weight class, they can take a different belt route, they can take a defense that is safer. All of that keeps the record clean. Heavyweight history has a famous example of how this works. Riddick Bowe won major belts, but the sport still could not force him into the most dangerous fight on paper. After Bowe beat Evander Holyfield in 1992, the WBC wanted him to face his mandatory challenger, Lennox Lewis, who had beaten Bowe in the amateurs. Bowe's team did not take that fight. Bowe gave up the WBC belt instead. Next, let's look at how belts and rankings affect a boxer's record. Belts and rankings. Boxing has more than one champion in the same weight class because there are multiple sanctioning bodies. The big 4 are the WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO. Each one can have its own champion, its own rankings, and its own rules. That matters because it creates more than one path to a title, and more than one way to stay undefeated while still moving up. One simple example is how the WBA has used different versions of titles. For years, the WBA has had cases where there is a super champion and a regular champion in the same division. So a fighter can become a world champion without beating the one most fans think is the top champ in that weight class. You can see how belts create multiple routes by looking at real title wins that did not require beating a long-reigning champion. Amir Khan won the WBA light welterweight title against Andrei Kotelnik in 2009 at the MEN Arena in Manchester. Khan was a big name, but the key detail is that the belt was there to be won in that matchup, and once he had more control over his next fights. Title defenses can be chosen and timed differently than regular fights. You can also see how fast title status can change through WBA interim belts. Dmitry Bivol won a WBA interim light heavyweight title against Felix Valera on May 21, 2016. An interim belt is still a belt, and it still gives a fighter a position in the rankings and a reason to get matched a certain way. From there, the belt route can move a fighter upward while the record stays clean. Rankings are part of the same system. Each sanctioning body ranks contenders, but those rankings do not always match what fans think. A fighter can be ranked highly in one organization and not in another. If there are 4 belts, there are 4 sets of mandatories over time. That creates options, and options help undefeated records last longer. Promoters also play a big role. Promoter control. In boxing, the person with the most control is usually not the fighter. It is the people who pay for the show. The promoter controls dates, opponents, and where the fight happens. The fighter can say no, but the promoter can also say, if you don't take this, you don't fight for a while. A big part of promoter control is the contract. A boxer can sign a deal that gives the promoter options, which means the promoter can extend the deal for more fights if the boxer keeps winning. If the boxer loses, the deal can change or fall apart. That creates a simple incentive. Keep winning, keep getting dates, keep getting paid. The promoter also likes fighters who stay unbeaten because it is easier to sell undefeated. You can see this control in how some fighters stay inside one lane for years. Gervonta Davis spent a long stretch fighting inside the same promotional bubble. He would take a fight, then take another fight that made sense for the next level, then later take the bigger names when the money and the timing were right. You also see promoter control when a fighter tries to move faster than the business wants. Ryan Garcia's relationship with Golden Boy Promotions, which began when he signed in 2016 and stretched through fights like Romero Duno in 2019 and Devin Haney in 2024, has repeatedly led to public disputes over who actually calls the shots on opponents. Garcia has even said that his next fight will be his last under Golden Boy once his current contract ends. Pay-per-view adds another level to this. Pay-per-view and the zero. Pay-per-view changed what an undefeated record means. Before, a zero was just a nice detail. With PPV, the zero can be the whole sales pitch. It turns into a simple story you can sell in one sentence: undefeated star. A big reason is the gap between a normal fight payday and a PPV payday. If a fighter can make more money by saving the biggest matchup for later, then later starts getting pushed back. The wins are not only about getting better, they're also about making the next event bigger. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is the clearest example. He leaned into it so hard that money became his nickname. He kept winning, kept the record perfect, and kept making the paydays bigger. His fight with Oscar De La Hoya on May 5, 2007 in Las Vegas was a turning point. At that point, the story wasn't just Mayweather's skill, it was whether his perfect record would survive. His record started to matter just as much as his talent. Then you get the long wait problem. If a matchup is worth more money later, it can stall even when fans want it now. Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao is the classic example. It happened in 2015 after years of buildup. The tactic of avoiding and delaying fights is common. Avoiding the wrong fight. Ducking is the word fans use, but it's usually less dramatic than that. A team looks at a matchup and decides it's the wrong fight at the wrong time. Sometimes it's because the style is a nightmare. Sometimes it's because the money isn't big enough yet. The toughest opponents get pushed back, and the undefeated record stays clean. A clear example is Billy Joe Saunders versus Demetrius Andrade. In July 2018, the WBO ordered Saunders to fight Andrade, a risky mandatory. But Saunders never took it. After failing a drug test, he vacated the belt in October, and Andrade instead fought Walter Cautendokwa for the vacant title 10 days later. The mandatory vanished almost overnight. Style is another huge reason teams avoid certain fights. And Winky Wright is a good example. In the mid-2000s, his name kept coming up around stars like Floyd Mayweather, Oscar De La Hoya, but the fights never materialized. Wright was a southpaw with a rock-solid high guard, so he was a tough matchup. Shane Mosley, nicknamed Sugar, took that risk anyway. He fought Wright on March 13, 2004, at the Mandalay Bay Event Center in Paradise, Nevada, with major titles at stake at 154 pounds. Mosley went in with a strong record and big plans. Wright won a clear decision, and Mosley's perfect run at that moment was gone. That is what teams are trying to avoid. One style problem, one night, and the zero is finished. That was then. Boxing looks very different today. The modern schedule. Modern top boxers usually fight less often than past greats. That matters because fewer fights means fewer chances to take a loss. It also means the calendar can be planned around 1 or 2 big nights a year, which means less risk. You can see the old pace by looking at records from earlier eras. Sugar Ray Robinson had years where he fought almost every month. In 1949, he fought 16 times. Now compare that to a modern star schedule. Fighters at the top often fight once or twice a year. Even when they are active, it can be 3 fights in 2 years, not 3 fights in 6 months. That slower pace gives teams time to pick opponents, time to plan camps, and time to recover. A clean modern example is heavyweight. Alexander Usyk turned pro in 2013 and, through 2025, has had 24 pro fights while rising through cruiserweight and then heavyweight eras. His title fights and big fights have been spaced out with long training camps and long gaps. That's normal now. You can also see this with modern stars who rose on controlled schedules. Anthony Anthony Joshua turned pro in 2013 and has had about 33 fights in roughly 12 years, usually 2 or 3 a year, not constant activity. Early on, he moved faster. Long camps and long gaps became the norm. Canelo Alvarez has had over 60 fights across nearly 2 decades, yet his biggest bouts are still spaced months apart and treated as major events. When the money and stakes are high, the calendar slows down.